The girl who didn't belong. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in that dining room. Because without it, you won't understand why her words cut as deep as they did. I grew up the daughter of a truck driver and a night shift office cleaner. My childhood smelled like instant coffee at 5 a.m. and my mother's tired perfume when she kissed me goodnight before her shift. We didn't have much. What we had, we held onto with both hands. Every birthday, every Sunday dinner, every hand-me-down coat that still felt like love because of who gave it to me. So when I met Daniel Whitfield at 26 years old, at a barbecue thrown by a mutual friend, I wasn't looking for money. I wasn't looking for a name. I was looking at a man who listened when I talked, really listened, the way people rarely do, and who made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on a burger in front of his whole friend group. I fell for him before I ever knew his last name meant something in our town. By the time I found out, it was already too late. I was already his. His mother, Patricia, made sure I understood the cost of that from the very first dinner I had at her table. She asked what my father did for a living. I told her proudly, because I have always been proud of my father, of the calluses on his hands and the 22 years he spent behind the wheel of a delivery truck to put food on our table. Patricia smiled at me, a smile with no warmth in it at all. How resourceful of him, she said, and turned back to her wine like the conversation and I had already ended. I laughed it off in the car that night. Daniel apologized. I told him it didn't matter. It mattered. It mattered more than I let myself admit for the next 3 years of my life. The wedding she almost ruined. Daniel proposed on a bridge, on a cold October evening, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. I said yes with tears freezing on my cheeks. I thought in that moment that nothing could touch how happy I was. Patricia touched it within 24 hours. She called Daniel the next morning, not to congratulate him, but to ask, in a voice I could hear even through the phone pressed to his ear, whether he'd really thought this through. Whether marrying a schoolteacher with no family standing was the decision he wanted to make with the Whitfield name. I stood in our kitchen and listened to my fiancé defend me to his own mother, his knuckles white around the phone, his voice shaking with a fury I'd never heard from him before. And I remember thinking, this is going to happen again, and again, for the rest of our lives. I was right. My parents paid for our wedding with money they scraped together for 2 years, money that should have gone toward my father's knee surgery, money I didn't find out about until much later, because they never wanted me to feel guilty about it. Patricia sat in the front row in a dress that cost more than my father's surgery would have, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected to this union, I swear to you, I watched her lips part. Daniel squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Neither of us looked at her again for the rest of the ceremony. The pregnancy that broke the peace. For 3 years, I told myself I could survive Patricia in small doses. Sunday dinners, holidays. The careful, clipped way she introduced me to her friends as Daniel's wife, never once by name, as if I were a title he'd acquired rather than a person he loved. Then I got pregnant, and small doses stopped being possible. I found out on a Tuesday morning, alone in our bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines while my hands shook so badly I dropped the test twice. Daniel came home to find me sitting on the bathroom floor, crying, and when I held it up to show him, he sank down next to me and we cried together. Right there on the tile, holding each other like the whole world had just tilted sideways into something impossibly good. That was the last purely happy moment I remember before Patricia found out. We told her at Sunday dinner. I remember every detail of that table, the white tablecloth, the 2 bright chandelier, Robert's face lighting up before Daniel even finished the sentence. Patricia set her wine glass down. Slowly. Deliberately. "Are congratulations really in order?" she asked, looking directly at me, not at her son. "Or are we simply expected to accept whatever happens in this family, regardless of whether it strengthens it or dilutes it? Dilutes it." I felt those 2 words land in my chest like a physical blow. I looked at Daniel. I looked at Robert, who stared down at his plate and said nothing the way he always said nothing, and the first understood, with a clarity that still makes my stomach turn 6 years later, that this woman had just called my unborn child a threat to her bloodline. I didn't cry until we got in the car. Then I cried the whole way home while Daniel apologized over and over, his voice breaking, promising it would get better once the baby came. I believed him. I was wrong. 8 months pregnant and out on the street, the 7 months that followed were a slow, grinding erosion of everything I had left in me. Patricia questioned my choice of doctor. She questioned whether I'd really go back to teaching after the baby, as if my career, the one I'd built with my own 2 hands, was a hobby she could dismiss with a raised eyebrow. She hired a decorator, without asking either of us, to redesign the nursery Daniel and I had already painted ourselves, by hand, on a Saturday afternoon, a soft, warm yellow, with tiny hand-painted stars on one wall that Daniel had done himself badly, laughing the whole time. She replaced it, in her plans, with pale family crest blue. When I told her gently that we'd already chosen our own design, something in her face went cold and final. "I've spent 30 years building something in this family," she said, rising from her chair, her voice climbing, "and I will not watch it get painted over in yellow by someone who doesn't understand what it means to protect a legacy." I was 8 months pregnant. My feet were swollen. My back had been aching for 6 straight hours. And I looked at this woman, who had never once asked how I was feeling, never once asked about the baby with anything resembling warmth, and I told her as calmly as I could manage that it was our nursery, our child, our decision. She stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. "Then perhaps," she said, and her voice had gone quiet now, quiet in the worst way, "you and that baby don't belong under this roof, or in this family at all." The room went silent. I could hear the clock ticking on her mantel. I could hear my own heartbeat. "Blood matters, Claire," she said, and she said my name like it tasted bad in her mouth. "And you have none of ours, you never will. Get out. Both of you. Take your yellow paint and your working-class opinions, and go build your little legacy somewhere else. This family was never going to be yours." I stood there with one hand pressed against my belly, feeling my daughter kick, hard, insistent, as if she could feel the air in that room turning to ice. And something inside me, something that had been bending for 3 straight years, finally, quietly, broke. Daniel stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a crack that echoed through the whole house. He grabbed my coat off the back of my chair, wrapped it around my shoulders, and walked me out of that house without saying a single word to his mother. Robert followed us to the car. His eyes were wet. He apologized over and over in a whisper, like he was afraid she'd hear him from inside. He never once told her to stop. Not that night. Not in 6 years. We drove home in silence. I remember pressing my forehead against the cold window, watching the Whitfield estate shrink in the side mirror and thinking, I will never let my daughter know a love that comes with conditions like that. Never. We didn't speak to Patricia again for 6 years. Building something she couldn't touch, I wish I could tell you the years that followed were easy. They weren't. But God, they were ours. Daniel cut contact with his mother almost completely. Robert called occasionally, quietly, carefully, like a man defusing a bomb every time he dialed our number, never once mentioning Patricia unless he had to. My daughter, Lily, was born 3 weeks after that dinner, furious and loud and perfect, with Daniel's eyes and, according to my mother, my own father's stubborn chin. Patricia did not call, did not send a card, did not send so much as a single text message. I held my daughter in a cramped hospital room with my parents crowded around the bed, my father crying openly for the first time I could remember, and I thought, this is what family actually looks like. Not a name, not old money, not a seat at a table you have to earn. The first 2 years nearly broke us financially. One income, student loans, a 2-bedroom apartment with a leaking faucet neither of us had time to fix. But my parents drove 2 hours every other weekend, without fail, just to rock their granddaughter to sleep and fill our freezer with home-cooked meals. We had less money than the Whitfields ever imagined possible. We had more love in that cramped apartment than I ever felt in Patricia's mansion. Daniel threw himself into his engineering work, climbing steadily, quietly, proving something to himself more than to anyone else. I went back to teaching, and within 4 years I became department head, a title I earned with my own exhaustion, my own late nights grading papers at our kitchen table while Lily slept down the hall. By year 5 we bought a small house of our own. Nothing like the Whitfield estate, no chandeliers, no family crests stitched into curtains. Just warm colors we picked ourselves. A kitchen that smelled like my mother's cooking, a backyard where Lily learned to ride a bike, falling and laughing and getting back up over and over, the same stubborn resilience I'd inherited from my own parents. I built a life Patricia Whitfield had no hand in and no claim to. And most days I didn't think about her at all, most days. The phone call, it was a Tuesday. I noticed that immediately, the way you notice small cruel coincidences, because 6 years earlier, on a different Tuesday, I'd sat on a bathroom floor finding out I was pregnant with the granddaughter Patricia had called a threat before she'd even drawn breath. Daniel's phone rang during dinner. Robert's name lit up the screen. Daniel almost let it go, an old habit, protecting the fragile, hard-won piece of our little house, but something made him answer. I watched his face change as he listened, the color draining out slowly, like watching a light dim. His fork slid from his fingers and clattered against his plate. When? A long pause. Is she okay? Another pause, longer, worse. We'll be there. He set the phone down on the table like it weighed 100 pounds. Lily kept eating her mac and cheese, 6 years old, and blissfully unaware that the ground beneath our entire family had just shifted. My mother's in the hospital, Daniel said, his voice hollow. Kidney failure. It's bad, Claire. They're saying she needs a transplant soon, or she's not going to make it. I felt something twist hard in my chest. Not joy. I want to be clear, never that. But something complicated and heavy. 6 years of silence and cruelty sitting like a stone between me and that hospital bed. They're testing family members, he continued, watching me carefully, like he was afraid of what my face might do. Me, my dad, cousins. Her blood type's rare, O negative. It's not an easy match. I didn't say anything. I thought about a doorway, a pointed finger. The words, you and that baby don't belong. Then Daniel said the thing that changed everything. Claire, he said, quiet, almost afraid to say it out loud. You're O negative too. I remember from when Lily was born, walking back into that house. I want to be completely honest with you about what I felt walking into that hospital room 3 days later, after the tests confirmed what Daniel remembered, that out of everyone in that family, every cousin, every sibling, even Robert himself, I was the only person on earth who was a match to save Patricia Whitfield's life. I felt no triumph. I know some of you are hoping for a moment where I walk in and make her beg, make her grovel, make her pay in full for 6 years of cruelty before I even consider helping. Not. And honestly, that's not who I want to be, not for her, and certainly not for the daughter watching everything I do. What I felt walking into that room was something quieter, heavier, stranger. Patricia looked small in that bed, smaller than I'd ever seen her, stripped of the tailored dresses, the perfect posture, the sharp, controlled voice that had once cut me open at a dinner table. Her skin had a grey, papery tint, and 4 lines snaked into the back of her hand. Robert sat beside her, visibly older than the man I remembered, his hand resting gently over hers like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. She looked up when I walked in. I watched something move across her face, shock first, unguarded and raw, then something else underneath it that I'd never once seen on her before. Shame. Claire, she said, and my name sounded strange and small in her mouth after 6 years of silence. I didn't bring up the dinner. I didn't bring up the nursery, the doorway, the words you have none of our blood, you never will. I simply asked how she was feeling, and let Daniel explain that I was a match, and that whatever happened next was entirely, completely my decision. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost every ounce of the sharpness I remembered. You don't owe me anything, she said. I know exactly what I said to you in that house 6 years ago. I have had a great deal of time, lying in this bed, to sit with those words. Robert's eyes filled. Daniel's hand found mine and gripped it hard. I'm not asking you to forget it, Patricia said. I would never ask that of anyone. I'm only telling you, you have every right to walk out of this room right now, and I would understand it completely. I would deserve it completely. The hardest decision of my life. I sat with that moment for days, not hours, days. Because decisions like this don't happen in a single dramatic breath, no matter how the story might want you to believe they do. They happen slowly, at kitchen tables, in quiet conversations with Daniel, after Lily went to bed, on the phone with my mother, who listened without a single word of judgment and reminded me, gently, that this decision belonged to no one on this earth but me. I thought about the yellow nursery Patricia had tried to erase before my daughter even had a name. I thought about 6 birthdays, 6 school plays, 6 scraped knees that Patricia had missed by choice, not by circumstance. I thought about the word blood, and the way she'd wielded it like a knife, carving a line between who belonged and who didn't. And then I thought about my daughter, because whatever Patricia had done to me, whatever cruelty she'd shown a terrified, exhausted, 8 months pregnant 28-year-old standing in her dining room, Lily was still her granddaughter. Blood, in the very sense Patricia had always meant it. And somewhere in the middle of 6 years of hurt, I understood something Patricia herself had never understood. Family isn't a wall you build to keep people out, it's a decision you make again and again about who you choose to become, especially when it costs you something. I decided to donate my kidney. Not because Patricia deserved it. I want to be honest with you, I don't think in any simple sense of the word that she did. I decided because I refused to let her cruelty shrink the size of my own heart. She had spent 30 years believing love was something you rationed out to people who'd earned it. I was not going to spend the rest of my life believing the same thing. I told Daniel my decision at our kitchen table, at midnight, the house silent around us. He cried, not simple relief, but something tangled and complicated. Grief for 6 wasted years sitting right alongside gratitude for the woman he'd married. The surgery happened 5 weeks later. What happened after I won't pretend the surgery was easy, or that 6 weeks of recovery didn't test me. The exhaustion, the careful restricted movement, the strange, aching vulnerability of having given away a literal piece of myself to a woman who once told me, to my face, that I would never be family. But I want to tell you what happened after, because I believe it matters more than the surgery itself. Patricia came to Lily's 7th birthday party 4 months later. She sat quietly in the corner at first, unsure of her welcome, small in a way I'd genuinely never seen her before. And I watched my daughter, who barely remembered this woman, who had grown up almost entirely without her, walk right over and hand her grandmother a piece of birthday cake without a second thought. The way children do, without the weight adults carry. Patricia cried. I had never once seen her cry in 8 years of knowing her. I won't tell you she and I became close, because I think honesty matters more than a tidy bow tied around a hard story. We are not warm with each other in the way mothers and daughters-in-law sometimes are. We don't talk every Sunday, but she comes to birthdays now. She asks about my work, my parents, without the old edge buried underneath every word. Last Christmas she gave Lily exactly the gift Lily had asked for. Nothing chosen to prove a point about legacy, nothing about the Whitfield name at all. And once, only once, sitting at my kitchen table in the small house she once implied I didn't deserve to build, she said something I still think about. I spent 30 years protecting a legacy, she told me quietly. It took almost losing everything to understand the legacy was never supposed to be the name. It was supposed to be the people. I got that backward for a very long time, Claire. Longer than I'm proud to admit. I didn't forgive her completely that day. I'm not sure complete forgiveness is something I owe anyone, including myself, and I won't pretend otherwise for the sake of a clean ending. But I let go of something heavy I'd carried for 6 years. Not for her, for me, and for my daughter, and for the kind of mother I want to be, one who never teaches her that love is a debt collected only from people who've proven they deserve it. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, giving a piece of myself to a woman who once stood in a doorway and told me I would never be blood. I tell them the truth, I don't. Not because she earned it. She didn't, not in the way we usually mean that word. I did it because I refused to let her cruelty decide the shape of my own heart. She spent 30 years believing family was something you protected by keeping people out. It took me 6 painful years to learn that family is something you build by choosing, again and again, who you let in. Including, sometimes, the very people who once tried hardest to keep you out if you've ever been told you don't belong. In a family, in a room, in a legacy someone else built, without asking you. I hope this story reminds you of something important. You get to decide what kind of person that cruelty makes you, not them, you. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed to Story House. There's a lot more where this came from.